All right.
Pastor, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
Good. You were here last week because we have that cold that's going through.
I have last week's handout if you want it.
Yes. I said it first. Oh, she has news.
You have news. You got another job offer?
Yeah, the same one.
Did you
Your
want-
son's
did you
been
want-
very helpful.
Good.
She needs to meet in person.
Yeah,
One of these days.
it's pretty much the same offer, except it's not full, so $2 less.
Okay.
But it's more comfortable that way because I'm a new grad and going back and forth like that was probably not the best.
So she got an offer from Nyack, Montefiore,
Okay.
and then she kind of called the nursing director at San and said, look, I'm gonna take this offer because you haven't come through with anything, and she said, well, give me a day or two, and then she was ready to take the job at Montefiore, and then they said, no, just interview for this as a formality, and
God was testing my patience because I almost just took Nyack. And multiple times I was like, alright, I'm just gonna call Nyack and accept it. Even though it's not what I really wanted. And then at the last second, Good Sam was like, okay, we have something for you. Oh, goodness.
That's great.
yeah.
Congratulations again.
Thank you.
Starts November 13th.
Yeah.
So they have a few days where they could buy it and say, no.
You're after tomorrow.
Dads are supposed to.
What will your schedule be?
3 12-hour shifts. Well, they're like 14-hour shifts.
Okay. So
Um,
that's full time, so
Yeah.
you'll have full benefits.
yeah. I don't know. They're gonna be different days every week.
Yeah.
Nights, she's on nights.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
But for the first 3 months while I'm on orientation, it's days.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
You'll gather a lot of experience. What's the department?
it's med-surg
Med-surg.
tele. Yeah.
Tele.
So it's kind of more acuity patients. So it's not ICU, but it's kind of like a peri-ICU, I guess. Because they take more higher acuity patients, like stroke patients and cardiac drip patients. So.
Hello. Hello, how are you today?
This is Sanford, in case you needed the reminder.
You know.
Hello. Welcome. There's a handout right there that you might want to follow along with tonight. And if you're interested, there's handouts from the last 4 weeks there, if you want.
Where?
Right here. Each paperclip is a number. There's no test, so.
So yeah, through this,
I'm well, how are you? Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. On that desk over there is the handout. Just want to remind you all that we're live streaming this on Facebook. I'm not on Facebook, YouTube. So watch your language. I'm kidding, of course. You don't have to worry
you
about
threw yourself under the bus in the sermon
it. Did I?
with the deck.
Yes,
I felt bad for you.
just being honest. The one over there is tonight's. These are from the previous weeks. You can sit anywhere. If you're not comfortable sitting in a desk, there's a straight chair there, and there's a couple of teachers' chairs that you're welcome to use too.
So was it the same type of gospel music as the other one you went to?
Yes, it's the Gaither Vocal Band and artists that are similar, some younger, some older. Yeah, it was wonderful. It's Friday night was 4 hours, Saturday afternoon was 4.5 hours. Definitely get your money's worth. It's a great time.
I
of
want my
worship.
area too.
We didn't really, yeah, it's a nice area. We just, yeah, it is, it's a nice area. Kelly did just a little bit of shopping, there's an outlet mall right next to where we live. And I sat in the car and talked to my friend.
Nice.
All right, there's a couple people in the room that you may not know or that may not know all of us, so if you all don't mind, if we could just reintroduce ourselves very quickly. I'm Dennis Ashley. Please.
Anthony?
Annie. Tamim.
T-A-M-I-M.
Annie and Tamim, T-A-M-I-M. I don't think I knew your first name. I know I've said hi to you a lot of times, but I hadn't learned your name. Tamim.
Lindsay.
Paul?
And Diane?
Nathan?
Safford.
Kathy?
All right. We are starting 1 Kings this week. If you're just joining us, we started on January 1st reading through the Bible one chapter a day. Just one chapter a day. A lot of people try to read through the Bible in a year, and that's somewhere between 3 and 5 chapters a day. And you get through the first book, Genesis, pretty well, because it's a story that's unfolding. And then you get into Exodus, and it's this good story unfolding. And then you get to Leviticus, and there's no movement. The characters are in one place. They're not moving at all, the whole book. And it's all about the laws and the commandments, and people quickly get distracted and get discouraged and are starting to ask, why am I even trying to read this? I don't understand it. I don't understand why all of this, and I don't even think this applies to me today. So we decided that we would try and take smaller bites and try to work through just a single chapter a day. It's going to take us a little more than 3 years to do it at this pace, but ultimately, if we hang in there with it, I think that the benefit to us will be maybe better than if we try to force it ourselves to get through it in a year. So, with us going through one chapter a day on Wednesday nights, we're looking at the 7 chapters that, if you were reading on this schedule, the 7 chapters that you would have read in the last 7 days. Now, don't feel like you have to do those, you have to do that reading, or you're not going to be allowed to be here. It's nothing like that. If you're here for the first time tonight, you see I've written out a little my synopsis, my summary of the 7 chapters. We'll kind of talk our way through it. And if you have questions, and honestly, those questions don't have to be limited to these 7 chapters. If you are dealing with something in your life right now, and you'd like to know, does God's Word offer me any guidance or any help or any encouragement with what I'm facing right now, bring that question, and we will just set aside the 7 chapters in 1 Kings or whatever it might be, and see if we can't together find something from God's Word that can help, and even pray together. And to that end, I would like to ask, we haven't talked about this at all yet, but I would like to ask that anything that we share in this room tonight or any other Wednesday night that we're here stays in this room. If someone in the room shares something they're struggling with, or a prayer request, we want to bear their burden and pray along with them. But what I like to remind myself is, if you tell me something, you give me information, it's your information. I'm a steward of it. What I do with your information is I'm responsible to you for what I do with the information you give me. So I will not talk about anything you say to me without your permission. Does that make sense to you? And if we have that kind of an understanding, then we can begin to have some kind of sense of trust. This is a safe place. We can talk about whatever is, whatever we're dealing with, whatever questions may have arisen, whatever circumstances or situation I might be facing. And I know everybody in the room has circumstances and situations we're facing. Every single one of us. We're either in the middle of a crisis, or we just came through a crisis, or we're about to start into a crisis. One of those three. And if you're in between, if you're not in a crisis right now, praise God for that. I hope it lasts. But this is a time for us to get strong and healthy and ready for whatever might come next. Because what is that Southwest Airlines commercial? Life comes at you fast. You see that? Life comes at you fast, right? And you never know. We were coming home from a soccer game yesterday. We were just getting off of Interstate 84. We had been across the river in Peekskill. We were just getting off Interstate 84 at the Maybrook-Montgomery exit. And as we were getting off, emergency vehicles were getting on I-84 headed toward Middletown. Something had happened on the highway. I heard later that there was a collision involving 2 tractor trailers. I don't know any of the details about that, but you just never know when your next crisis might be around the next corner you turn, right? So, with that in mind, I'd like to pray, and we'll take a minute to find out if there's a question or a topic or something you'd like to talk about. And if not, we'll start talking about 1 Kings. Let's pray. Thank you, Father, for the people who are here tonight, for those who have been here for several weeks already, and for those who are here for the first time tonight. We thank you for each one. And I do pray, Father, that as we talk tonight, that this will be a time that will be helpful to us, will be meaningful to us, and will encourage us and strengthen us in our understanding of you, our understanding of your word, and our relationship with you, whatever condition our relationship with you might be in, Lord, that it would be improving. And I ask your help tonight as we talk together in Jesus' name. Amen. I guess I should say one other thing since we're talking about trust and confidentiality. I already said we're live streaming this on YouTube. But at any moment, we can get up and turn that off if there's something that you would like to talk about that you would prefer not go out over our YouTube channel, okay? All you have to do is say the word. My sister Debbie and my brother-in-law John are probably watching right now from afterwards. So hi, Debbie. Hi, John. If we turn you off, you'll know why. Okay. Having said that, now, is there anything that comes to mind that you'd like to talk about or ask, a question? At dinner tonight, Kathy asked a question from the book of Ruth. That was before we started reading together, but that's okay. It doesn't have to be in 1 Kings chapters 1 through 7 where your question might arise. This is an opportunity. Feel free to interrupt me at any time with your comment or question or observation or something that you didn't understand or didn't agree with. You do not have to agree with me. That's not a requirement. Okay, 1 Kings, chapter 1. 1st and 2nd Samuel tell us the story of the nation of Israel coming out of the period of the judges and asking Samuel, the last judge, to appoint over them a king because they wanted to be like everybody else. They wanted to be like all the other nations and kingdoms around them. They wanted a king. They wanted to be able to look at a king. They wanted to be proud of their leader and say, well, I don't know what we should do. We'll just tell the king and he'll know what to do. And Samuel was grieved, and he went to God, and God said, Samuel, don't be grieved by this. They have not rejected you, they rejected me. And if it's a king they want, a king they will have. But what they don't realize yet is that if you have a king, as the king goes, so goes the kingdom. If you have a good king, God will bless the whole kingdom. If you have a wicked king, the whole kingdom will suffer. And First and Second Kings are going to give us example after example after example of kings of Israel and then kings of Israel and Judah when the kingdom is divided in two. Example after example of kings who do not follow the Lord, and not only their consequences personally, but how the whole kingdom suffered as a result. Is there anything like that in our experience today? Is there anything like that? That as the king goes, so goes the kingdom. Can you think of any?
Look at our current administration.
Okay, in our government, but I'm going to agree with you without getting political. But I'm thinking about a far more basic societal unit.
The church?
The church, yes, but even more basic than that.
Family.
The,
The family.
The family. Okay. Hey,
Hello.
hey, how you doing?
good to see you tonight. Good to see you. Everyone, this is Pastor Raphael. This is the pastor of Harmony in Espanol. Did you pick that up? Oh. Thank you. Thank you all. The family. Who's responsible for the overall health of the family? The father, mom and dad. Usually mom and dad working together. Dad has the responsibility of leading the family. If dad doesn't, then mom has to. And we see, today, we see examples of fractured families. We have a number of, I have some boys on our varsity soccer team who don't have fathers, who are being raised by their mothers. In one case, being raised by his great-grandmother. And he suffers. He's at a disadvantage because he doesn't have someone to look up to teach him how to be a man. He's a young man who's struggling to understand, how do I behave as a man? I'm a boy. I'm on my way to, it's inevitable he's going to become a man. What kind of man he becomes is largely dependent on how he's raised. And his great-grandmother's doing a wonderful job, but she cannot show him how to be a man. Does that make sense to you? So, as the king goes, so goes the kingdom. I think it's often true. As the father goes, so goes the family. Now, that doesn't mean that moms cannot be successful in raising their children without a father. But it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder for a dad to raise a family without a mother. Sometimes that happens. It's less common, but it does happen. And when one parent has to do the job of both father and mother, jack of all trades and master of none. So, anyway, all of that sets up the king. The first king is Saul. And he starts out looking like he's going to be a success because he's tall and handsome. How many of us vote for political candidates who are more attractive to the eye, or then possibly more attractive to the ear? But then they don't deliver on their promise or what they imply to be promising. So Saul, the first king, was a failure, but God let him run his course, and he reigned over Israel for how many years? We remember this now, 40 years. 40 years Saul was king, but he was already rejected as king much earlier than that, and God chose his replacement, not his son Jonathan, but rather, who did God choose to follow Saul? David. And Saul knew that David was preferred, and he resented him for it, and he sought for most of his life to get David out of the way so that his own son Jonathan, whom he loved, who everybody loved, could be king in his place. But both Saul and Jonathan's lives ended in battle, and David eventually did become king. And David started out great. How long did David reign?
40 years.
40 years. It's easy to remember. 40 years for Saul, 40 years for David, and then 40 years for Solomon. David started out strong. He was loved by the people. It all started with that showdown between David and the giant. And that was the beginning of Saul's resentment of David, because the people's hearts went toward David instead of toward Saul. David started out strong, and then he began to falter, right? And was it last week or the week before that we talked about David's great failure, his most famous failure? The week, 2 weeks ago with Bathsheba. And we talked about how at several key moments in that story, David was faced with a choice, and his options kept getting worse and worse, because when you make a bad choice, the next set of choices that are presented to you are harder to make. Until finally David was faced with the choice of admit what he had done and let it be known, or take the life of a friend. And he eventually made the worst choice and conspired to take the life of his friend to cover up his sin. Except he was not able to cover it up, not when God is looking, because nothing is hidden from the eyes of him with whom we must give account, to whom we must give account. So that came out, and David suffered as a result. And not only did he lose the child that he had conceived of Bathsheba, but God also said, you're going to be paying for this sin in your family for the rest of your life. And last week we looked at Absalom's rebellion and ultimately Absalom's death. And then people around David began to betray him until finally things really got out of control. He did end up as back on the throne and made another terrible mistake at the very end of his life with the census, that ill-conceived census, and he was punished again. God said, and this is such an unusual story, God said, you're going to be punished, but I'm going to let you choose your punishment. Dads, have you ever done that with your kids? Do you want to be grounded? Do you want to be whipped? Or do you want to have your cell phone taken away? Well, these three options were much worse than that. Do you want famine for the whole country? Do you want to be pursued by your enemies for 3 months? 3 years of famine, 3 months chased and defeated by your enemies, or 3 days of pestilence, plague? David said, well, what was David's choice? I'd rather be at the mercy of God than at the hands of my enemies, so I'll take the plague. And that's what happened, and finally God relented, and David made a sacrifice. And the last thing we talked about with David last week was the lesson of, I will not offer to God a sacrifice that costs me nothing. And we talked last week about commitment and what sacrifice means. Sacrifice means it's going to cost you something. An offering is going to cost you something. We don't just give to God from what we have left over. If I take my car to the car wash and I put a couple dollars in the box for tips for the people that vacuum the car and dry the car, I put in a few dollars, whatever I have loose in my wallet, a tip. And I usually don't remember to plan ahead for that, so I end up leaving what I have, and I sometimes feel embarrassed that I should have left more. You ever feel like that? But that's not the way we should approach giving to God, is it? And David said, I'm not going to offer God a a sacrifice in this situation where all I'm giving to God is what this man gave me. He said, I'm going to give you the piece of land, I'm going to give you the oxen, I'm going to give you the wood, I'm going to give you everything you need so that you can make this offering and sacrifice. Because David, I admire you as king, and I love God, and I want to participate in your sacrifice. And David said, no, thank you very much, but I will pay you what the land and the oxen are worth at a fair price, because I will not offer to God something that costs me nothing. And I think that that's a good lesson for all of us to learn. All right, that brings us to 1 Kings. And chapter 1 starts out with David in his old age. He's old, and probably his circulation is poor, and he's having a hard time staying warm in bed at night. So, okay. This is where I have to remind myself, don't judge people who lived 4,000 years ago. Don't judge them by our customs and sensibilities and sensitivities today. They thought, to keep King David comfortable, we're going to find a live bedworm. Now, how many of you have dogs that are allowed to sleep on the bed with you? That's a comfort, yes? Well, they found a beautiful young woman, and they said, we are honoring you, young Abishag from Shunam, the Shunammite, you beautiful young woman. We are honoring you. You won the beauty pageant, and your reward, your prize is you get to lay in bed with the king and snuggle up to him and keep him warm. Does anybody else feel all ugh about this?
Yeah.
I do. But like I said, these are people who lived in different times, and I am very, very thankful for verse 4 in 1 Kings chapter 1. The young woman was very beautiful, and she was of service to the king and attended to him, but the king knew her not. Now that's not a comment about old age and Alzheimer's or dementia. That's, he did not have sexual relations with her. Okay. Sigh of relief, for me at least, because the story just is, to our sensibilities today, it's just wrong.
We talked about this earlier.
Did you?
Well, he's got like
Yes.
whole wives.
He's got all these other women.
He's got wives, and he probably has concubines. Why does he need a fresh body?
Excellent. All of these women who also have 98.6 body temperatures on the average. Any one of them could have done this for the king. And we don't know why. Could you speculate? I mean, if we're just speculating and we're saying we don't know why, the Bible doesn't tell us why, but could you think of any reason possibly that would explain this?
Other than looking at it from a medical standpoint, which they didn't have a lot of medical,
All right.
but a young, active female, energetic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy. It is.
Mhm.
As soon as I read that, I go, here we go again.
Yeah.
The fact that they say knew or not means that the rest of the culture would have felt
Sure.
fine.
They would have assumed, and any one of us would have assumed, a beautiful young woman in bed with the king. Of course, we all know what's going on there, but they're very careful to say that's not what was going on there. Just consider a couple of things here. First of all, David's wives were aging right along with him. he probably was not taking new wives by this time. And some of those wives and concubines that had been with David for a while, they had status, they had standing. And they might have refused this assignment. And who's going to tell them what to do? Not David. I mean, David is the only one who could have, but he's probably not in a condition to do that. There's nothing in here that says David asked for this also.
No, it says the servants did.
They said, let's do this to help care for our master. We want to do whatever we can for him. We love him. He's been good to us. He's been good for the country. And we want to keep him as comfortable as we can. And
What is the Shunammite? Does that have something to do with it maybe?
it has to do with where she was from.
I mean, that's it.
Yeah,
So it's not-
she's from, it's the village that she's
Yeah.
from. But it says she's beautiful. She's a young, beautiful woman, chosen because of her youth and beauty. And this would have been an honor. This would have been an honorable position for her. In a couple chapters, we're going to come back to her. She figures into the story of Adonijah, and we'll talk about her again when we come to that. Okay, Adonijah, who's yet another one of David's sons, whose name begins with the letter A. So there was Amnon first, he died. There was Absalom, who tried to become king in David's place while David was still alive. He died. Now we're down to Adonijah. And Adonijah, seeing that his father was old, we're told he is also a handsome man. And he decided the time was right for him to assert his claim. And so he began to position himself to be next king. And he counseled with some of David's trusted advisors, including Joab, the military commander. If you're going to take over, you want to have the army on your side. That's pretty smart. And Abiathar, the priest. If you're going to try to take over, you want to have the church on your side. You want to have God on your side, or at least God's spokesman will say to the people, this is who God wants to be king. So he's making the right moves, but he neglected to bring Zadok the priest and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, Nathan the prophet, and Shimei and Ray and David's mighty men. He left them out.
Which that tells you he knew that Solomon was to be the next king.
Yeah.
Because he left that whole line out.
He left them out purposely because he wanted to get this done quickly and without any resistance. Now Benaiah's his role in David's regime was he was the chief of the Secret Service. He was the commander of the king's personal guard. Nathan, the prophet, was God's first choice to get his word out. He's the one who confronted David with his sin. And a couple of the other key people, Adonijah tried to advance his claim and get the job done before resistance could form against him. But Nathan the prophet went to Bathsheba, David's wife, possibly his favorite wife, and also the mother of Solomon, whom God had already told David would be king after him. And Nathan said to Bathsheba, here's what's happening, and you need to go in and see David. You tell him what's happening, and once you've talked to him, I'll come in and I will talk to him and confirm to him what you've told him. And so that's exactly what happens. Bathsheba went in and she said to David, you remember that you swore to me before God that my son, our son Solomon, would be king after you. And now Adonijah is setting himself up as king, and you have to do something about this before it's too late. And while she's still speaking, Nathan comes in to David and tells David the same story, confirming Bathsheba's testimony. And so David is convinced that he has to take action, and he does. And so he puts Solomon on the throne, and he involves Zadok the priest, verse 32, Nathan the prophet, Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, the commander of the king's guard, and they proclaim King Solomon king. They proclaim Solomon king, and they do this in public with all the proper fanfare and ceremony. And so the job is done. Solomon is king. Adonijah, meanwhile, is partying with his group. And news comes to him, uh-oh, we're too late. David has made Solomon king. And so Adonijah, realizing he's lost, sends word to his younger half-brother Solomon, asking for mercy, and would you spare my life? Yes, I tried to become king, but the king has made you king. I recognize your authority as king. Please don't kill me. And at the end of the chapter, Solomon decides, if Adonijah behaves, I will let him live. But if he misbehaves, his life is forfeit. That's chapter 1. Anything else come up as you were reading, if you were, any questions?
I just don't understand why Joab's still around. I think I would have offered it so long ago,
We're about to see that.
you know, but
Yep,
still too long.
too long. We'll talk about that because in chapter 2, David takes Solomon aside and he says, now listen, son, you're about to be king. I'm about to die. When I'm finished talking with you, I'm dying. And there's some people that you need to deal with. And he names some people who need to have some special treatment. And Joab is the first one on the list. Joab was a relative, first of all, and had been with David from the beginning, and had supported David through all the years of his reign as king, and had done some things that David told him to do that were ugly. Joab was the one that carried out David's execution order for Uriah. And so David, whatever reason, David felt like he owed Joab something, and he could not settle the score with Joab himself. But he said to Solomon, you're going to have to settle the score with Joab. He is not to be trusted. He is a man with blood on his hands. He's guilty of murder. He's done some unspeakable, despicable things, and you cannot trust him. You're going to have to get rid of him. And then he said, Barzillai, and I can't help but think about The Godfather and all the families, who's loyal to Don Corleone. But Barzillai and his sons have been good to David, and they should be treated with honor, and they should be trusted. And then he mentions Shimei. Shimei was the one who cursed David when David was fleeing from Absalom. And David's followers wanted to take his head off right there, and David said, no, we don't know, but that God told him to curse me. So we're not gonna harm him. And then after Absalom was out of the way and David returned, Shimei came and said, I'm sorry, my bad. And David accepted him back without judgment. But he said to Solomon, deal with Shimei. Don't let him go on living. What was the expression? You will know. Do not hold him guiltless. This is verse 9 of chapter 2. Do not hold him guiltless, for you are a wise man. You will know what you ought to do to him, and you shall bring his gray head down with blood to Sheol, to the grave. You're going to execute Shimei. Joab's got to go. Shimei's got to go. Barzillai and his sons, they've got to stay. You can trust them. And then verse 10, David slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David. Isn't it so nice, the euphemisms that the Bible has for death? Absent from the body, present with the Lord. Fallen asleep. David slept with his fathers. David died. And he was buried in the city of David. Okay, there are two possibilities. There are two cities called the city of David. What are they? Bethlehem, where David was born, where his family is from, and Jerusalem, where he established his capital, his palace, his kingdom. Probably he was buried in Jerusalem, but it's possible that it was a reference to Bethlehem. I just don't know. Maybe if I looked further and deeper, I would get better information. Maybe some of you know. But he died and was buried. He reigned 7 years in Hebron, and then after they captured the city of Jerusalem, he reigned 33 years in Jerusalem, a total of 40 years. And Solomon sat on the throne of David, his father, and his kingdom was firmly established. Okay. Continuing in chapter 2, Adonijah approaches Bathsheba, and he says to her, I come in peace, and I have one request. I know that Solomon is king. I'm not going to challenge his authority as king. I just have one request. Bathsheba says, what is your request? And he says, I really want Abishag the Shunammite to be my wife. You remember Abishag, was
Bad move.
bad move, the bed warmer, or foot warmer, whatever, for David. And so Bathsheba passes the request on to Solomon, and Solomon is furious and says, that's it, I told you guys you had to behave. If you misbehave, your life is forfeit. You misbehave, you're a dead man. Why?
That's a bold request.
It's a bold request.
She was part of the harem, you just don't do that.
She was part of the harem.
Absalom actually slept with some of David's concubines
That's right.
to disrespect him, to prove that he was.
That's right. When Absalom was challenging the authority of David, one of the things that he did was he took some of the women from David's harem, some of David's wives and concubines, and slept with them. And that is, in the culture, a statement to say, what is the king's is mine because I am the king. Solomon interpreted Adonijah's request, even though David had not had sexual relations with Abishag. She was part of his harem, part of the king's protected stable.
But we know David didn't sleep with her.
We know, maybe
They
nobody else.
don't. He probably,
He may not have known, yeah. But she was young and beautiful, and she caught Adonijah's eye, and he wanted her, and Solomon said, I'm sorry. Maybe he didn't even say, I'm sorry. He said, that is a bridge too far. You are demonstrating rebellion to the king by asking for that which belongs to the king. And because of that, you will not be allowed to survive. And so Adonijah's life is taken.
do you think he was just that arrogant? Cause it just, you know it's gonna end in death.
I don't know. It might be that he had really fallen for this beautiful young woman, and he wasn't trying to be rebelling against the king. He was just thinking, there's plenty of women, and she caught my eye, and I'm quite content. Now, I don't know, because the Bible doesn't tell us that. We're in that speculating realm, right? So we don't know. My human nature wants to believe the worst about people. Does anybody else identify with that? You want to believe the worst, but I am trying to discipline myself to believe the best of people, not just assume the worst every time. If I'm not told that somebody has evil intentions, I don't want my mind to assume that. because it's not helpful to me to look at other people that way.
However, he did try to take the kingdom.
He did, he thought he had a claim, and he did position himself to do it, but he recognized he failed, and he gave up, unlike his brothers. So, yeah, he's not a great guy.
Well, are you being a little hard on him? Because like.
I see, I don't wanna be hard, this is what I'm saying, I don't wanna be hard.
Adonijah
Yeah,
is Solomon's brother.
half-brother, yeah.
You know,
A son of David, and older than Solomon.
older, so,
Uh-huh.
but traditionally he had a stronger case for the throne. So Solomon, God's decision,
Yep.
but Solomon, isn't Solomon the one that's arrogant?
Mhm.
That's what I think, right? He's gonna kill his brother
Uh-huh,
because his brother wants wants his father's sloppy seconds.
yeah.
And it's, I don't know,
I agree with you, okay? What's missing in this story is that no one is asking God what they should do. And that's what Saul failed to do, and that's what David succeeded in doing often, not always. But when David inquired of the Lord before making a decision, and God answered him, and he did what God said, he was blessed. And when he didn't inquire of the Lord and did what his human nature said to do, he often made mistakes. Just like us, right? Just like us. So I agree. Now, the customary succession of kings had not yet been established in Israel. They would have maybe been assuming based on what the neighboring kingdoms did, but Saul's son did not succeed him as king. God chose Saul, and then he chose David, and then God chose Solomon of David's sons. So God had promised David, you will always have an heir, one of your line will always be on the throne in Israel. Adonijah was of his line, so maybe Adonijah had a reasonable claim, and he tried to advance his claim, and that alone is not necessarily evidence that he's a bad person.
I think he's humble, actually. I see more
Yeah.
good in him than I do in Solomon, right? Like he was
Yeah.
like, hey, you know what? Like God made it clear,
No, you're not the guy. Yeah.
I'm gonna live my
Yeah.
life now as a second fiddle,
Uh-huh.
and I'm gonna honor you. I see much, I don't know, that's me.
That's a good observation. It's a very good observation. When he realized he would not succeed David as king, he backed down. He backed off. He submitted, which is honorable.
I think personally,
Okay.
and I'm a very opinionated man,
Yeah.
that if he had a real claim, he would have included the other people because
Yeah.
it's the council, you seek the whole council,
Yeah.
or none of the council.
Yeah.
Because if you're only seeking part of the council, you're already aligning it, and it's already evil.
Yeah.
It's already evil.
Yeah.
And I see it strictly evil in my mind. But that's
Okay.
just me.
Based on the information we have, I think both opinions are valid based on the information we have. We don't know more than what the scripture tells us. It's clear, though, that Adonijah's request overstepped, at least in the eyes of Solomon. And here's the thing about when you have a king, there's no appeal.
Yeah.
Unless Nathan the prophet intervenes before Solomon acts, Solomon is going to do what Solomon does, and nobody else can say, you're not allowed to do that, because he's the king. Which is one of the reasons why most of us, I think, are thankful that we don't live in that kind of a governed society. We don't have a monarch who has divine right to rule, and no one can gainsay it.
The king has no clothes on, but you can't say it.
You can't say it. Unless you're a child. Yeah. Okay. At the end of chapter 2, Adonijah is off the board. Abiathar, the priest who supported Adonijah, is removed from his responsibilities as priest and exiled to his family farm. And then there's a note in there that that is the final fulfillment of the prophecy against Eli, the priest who failed to govern his own household. And Abiathar was a descendant of Eli, and him now no longer being actively serving as a priest is a fulfillment of God's prophecy against the house of Eli. And Joab is taken off the board, and Shimei is taken off the board. David's instructions to Solomon are carried out, and at the end of chapter 2, we see Solomon has now firmly consolidated his rule as king in Israel, and those challengers remaining have been taken out of play. That brings us to 1 Kings chapter 3. This is probably our favorite story about Solomon. Solomon started off wonderfully, and God loved Solomon, and he gave to Solomon the unique opportunity. God is a classic genie, and he says, I will grant you one wish. What would you like? Nowhere else do we see God dealing with anybody like this. But God comes to Solomon in a dream. Solomon has been worshiping and making sacrifices and offerings. And God is pleased with Solomon, even though his sacrifices and offerings are not being offered in the correct way. He's pleased with Solomon's heart, and so we read in verse 3 of chapter 3, Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David his father, except he sacrificed and made offerings at the high places. The high places is where the pagan worship. That was following the customs of the pagan nations around them. The high places were assumed to be closer to the gods, and places where our sacrifices would come to their attention more readily. So we will go to the high places and we will make those high places the places where we worship. Later on, we're going to see that this really becomes problematic in Israel. But God appears to Solomon in a dream, and he says to Solomon, ask what I shall give you. What would you ask of me, Solomon? I am God, I can do anything. What would you like for me to do for you? What would you have asked for?
I would not want to ask.
I would not. I get one wish. Can I have infinite wishes, please?
Well, we have to be in his position as a king, but I don't know.
I don't know that any one of us could have done any better than Solomon did. And I have a feeling that God had already been stirring Solomon's heart, and God knew that Solomon was ready to be asked this question, and he knew what Solomon would ask for. And it pleased him then to give Solomon the choice, to give Solomon the wish that he would grant, because he already knew what Solomon wanted more than any other thing. Now, he's a king's son already, so he probably already has a lot of the material things that people might want. That's not what he was looking for. He said, I have a great responsibility in front of me to lead your people, and I want to do it well. I want to do it as well as, or even better than my father David did. And I need wisdom, I need understanding. So if I could ask for anything, it would be, God, help me to know what I should do. And it pleased God. And of course, we know this story. Most of us who grew up in in Sunday school, or whatever, we heard this story from our childhood. God not only gave Solomon wisdom, so great that he was the wisest man in his day, maybe in any day, but he also said, because you asked for wisdom and not for riches or fame or glory or a long life, I'm going to give you those things too. Except there was a condition. So when we talk about God's treaties, God's agreements, God's covenants with people, there are two kinds of covenants that God makes. There is an unconditional covenant where God says, I am going to do this. Abraham, I am going to make you a great nation. Your descendants will be more numerous than the stars in the heaven. Later on he says, your descendants will be more numerous than the grains of sand on the seashore. And through you all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And that was an unconditional covenant, an unconditional promise. It was not dependent on Abraham being faithful or obedient or anything. God said, I have chosen you, Abraham, and I am going to do this through you. I'm going to do this for you, no matter what. And so when Abraham failed, when his son Isaac failed, when his son Jacob failed, when Jacob's 10 sons sold their younger brother Joseph into slavery, when all of those despicable things happened through Abraham's descendants, and all of the despicable things that they've done since, God's promise, first spoken to Abraham, is still in force. God never revoked that promise because it was an unconditional covenant. Now God's promise to Solomon here is a conditional promise. Verse 14, if you will walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. Part of God's gift to Solomon was long life if you don't turn away from me. How did it turn out for Solomon?
Oh, he turned away.
He reigned for 40 years, but his later years, he was not the man he started out to be. He did wonderful, great things, and during Solomon's lifetime, the kingdom of Israel was as large and glorious and magnificent as it has ever been. The borders of Israel under Solomon were wider than ever before or since. And yet, we sometimes wonder what might have been had Solomon not been turned aside. We'll probably talk a little bit about that. Maybe next week, or maybe when we get into Chronicles, when we come around to this again. But Solomon's heart was turned away from God because he started following after the pagan gods of his many wives and concubines. He was distracted.
Didn't the law state that kings were not supposed to have multiple wives?
Yeah,
Horses were chariots,
Yeah.
because they were signs of strength, and
Yeah.
we had all of that.
he had all of that. 700 wives, 300 concubines, 1,000 women. 1,000 women in his harem. Probably didn't even know all of their names. He probably didn't know all of them in any sense, but a lot of them are political and other things. But his heart was turned aside. His heart was turned away from God by too much influence from the nations around that turned his heart from God to other things. And that's a cautionary tale for all of us, right? It doesn't, I mean, it's great that we start out in the right direction, but it's imperative that we finish in the right, we finish even more strongly than we begin.
I always think of the bushel of bad apples, and
Mm-hmm.
you take a good apple and you put it in that bushel to try to make the bad apples good,
Yeah,
and it goes sour. And then you take one bad apple and put it in a bushel of good apples, and the whole bushel
turns
goes
the
sour.
whole, yeah.
And that doesn't mean we stop mingling in the world and stuff, but it doesn't, in our inner circles, we have to protect ourselves by hanging with the right people, God's people, because none of us are strong enough without God.
Yeah.
And I think that people start leaning on their own strength,
Yeah.
which is failed strength.
So I agree with you. The circle of people around you that are close enough to you to influence your thoughts and attitudes and actions, we need to be careful that we have chosen wisely. And at the end of Solomon's life, his son Rehoboam fails miserably in choosing the right advisors, and it ends up costing the kingdom. And I agree with you, we don't need to be disconnected from unsaved people, because we're supposed to be a light.
Right.
And we're not supposed to hide our light, we're not supposed to build a fortress and stay inside the fortress. The gates of hell will not prevail. The gates of hell are not able to stand against God's people, the church. We're not the ones behind the gates, we're the ones attacking the gates. And we sometimes mistake that. But the people that are closest to me, that are able to influence my thinking and my attitudes and reactions, and the people who I speak with about God, and who I listen to, telling me what they think, I have to be careful. We're going to talk about this on Sunday, by the way, where we are at the end of Colossians chapter 1.
Can I say something?
Yeah, of course.
I was thinking of, I see a lot of the Jewish people, they are living all kind of together.
Mm-hmm.
And, what I noticed is like the moms stay a lot, like together, they
Yeah.
put chairs in their like yards
Yeah,
where they all
yeah.
live. And I often think that, the Amish, and I think men
Yes.
do the same kind of thing.
Yes.
And it's sort of like they have their own area, and I thought, they can, they're all the same, and they're there for each other, and I think it's great, honestly,
Yeah.
but like, we as Gentiles or Christians or whatever,
Yeah.
it's important, and that's why, God says not to forsake the gathering with the brethren, because sometimes that, if we stay
Yes.
home or by ourselves, or, whatever, we never come
Yeah.
together,
Mm-hmm.
because I do think that like you said, with the family and
Yeah.
stuff, like everybody, we encourage each other and we can help each other, like,
Right.
stay on the right track or whatever, so.
So you mentioned 3 distinct groups of people who have that in common. Not all the Jewish, but you're probably referring to the Jewish communities,
That are around.
the Hasidic communities around us. There are a lot of Jewish people who don't belong to the Hasidic sect,
yeah.
community, and they are less, I think, less closed community. But the Hasidic Jewish community and the Amish community and the Mennonite community have this in common. How do you join that community?
The number one way is being born.
You have to be born in it, almost exclusively. You have to be born into that community. It is not an evangelistic community. It's not a community that is open to outsiders joining.
So you're not.
Now, that's not unheard of, it's not unheard of, but it's not an objective that those communities are striving for. Those communities are isolated to remain pure, to remain and I don't want this to be judgmental. I'm not trying to judge them or anybody else, but just to describe I think, from my point of view as an outsider, their reason for keeping the community close is to keep it pure and undefiled. And in their way of understanding God's requirement, and that was a requirement for the Jewish people, not to intermarry with other nations, to remain biologically pure, and as well as morally, spiritually pure. And that's the way for the Amish community. It's not an evangelistic community. The Mennonites are slightly more open to outsiders joining, but still, it's not an evangelistic community. But we understand our role as disciples of Jesus Christ to be a light to the world, and to be drawing people to be making disciples. Jesus' command to us, the Great Commission, go and make disciples. Teach them to obey what I have taught you. Teach them to live the way I taught you to live. Not to be isolationists. So there's a tension there. How can I be in the world? Jesus prayed for us, John 17. Be in the world, but not of the world. Because the world and the things of the world are passing away. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. Don't get caught up in seeking those things, because that's a dead end. But be in the world where you are living, and be my witnesses. I'm giving authority to you to be my witnesses. Go to Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, the uttermost parts of the world. And we have an evangelistic outlook. We're supposed to, at least. And the extent to which we're successful is largely the extent to which we understand how Jesus sees people who are not yet of us. Jesus sees those people as hostages to be rescued, not enemies to be defeated. The enemy is the spiritual enemy, the one who is holding them, has blinded them and bound them in chains. And our objective is to be the ones who help organize the jailbreak.
Yeah, we've been to like a Messianic congregation before, and that's what they said, that most of them have become believers because they're jealous of us because we actually know the Messiah. So they said that we have to make them jealous for the Messiah. Like, that's how you interact. So.
Yes. And we don't do that with words so much as we do that with evidence of a changed life. I come back to 1 Peter 3:15 again and again and again. Throughout the week, I think about that verse. In these days in my life, I spend more time, God brings that verse to my mind more than any other single verse. 1 Peter 3:15, Peter says, in your hearts, set apart Christ as Lord. It begins with me continually surrendering myself to the Lordship of Christ. In your hearts, set apart Christ as Lord. And always be ready to give an answer to everyone who asks you the reason for the hope that you have. But do this, we sometimes leave this part out, but do this with gentleness and respect. Now, there's an assumption in that verse that somebody is going to ask me a question, because I'm supposed to be ready to give an answer. I'm not supposed to answer the question that they haven't asked. Does that make sense to you? Then I can come across as being pushy and aggressive and judgmental. But if somebody asks me, why are you always happy? Why are you always joyful? Why do you always have a positive attitude? Why do I see you going out of your house on Sunday morning dressed up when most of us are going to play golf or going out and mowing the lawn or this or that? Why? Can I ask you a question? Why don't you do the things that other people do? Why do you do the things that I see you do? Ask me a question, and then I can give you an answer. Now, the inference that I make, so I've made an assumption, somebody's going to ask me a question. Now I'm making an inference that I'm supposed to live my life in such a way that people will want to ask me a question.
Does that go against the evangelical tenet of sending out missionaries and?
If by sending out missionaries you mean what we used to do when I was a teenager, we used to go through neighborhoods and knock on doors and say, we're from, in my case, Berean Bible Church, and we're starting a bus route through your neighborhood, picking up children and adults who want to ride to church. Would you like to ride on our bus? Looking for an opportunity to then say, this is what we believe. That's what we call then door-to-door evangelism. I am asking you if you will be willing to listen to me tell you what I believe. And that has been successful.
But it might have been successful, but is it God's plan, right? Like I do fall into what you said in the beginning, that we should live our life as a testimony for Jesus, right? Like that's what worship is. I fall short all the time, but like that's what we do. You know, and if we look at the history of colonialism, we sent missionaries everywhere, and they destroyed societies. Like, you know, the church has not just the Catholic Church, right? Like, you know, the church has a horrible history with evangelizing the world.
We've done,
and so like, you know, and I have come, you know, and I grew up in the same world of knocking on doors, direct people to VBS or whatever, you know, like I spent a lot of time doing that kind of stuff, right? But I do think that that stuff is not biblical, right? Like I have come down to a point where I think that, you know, if I talk to people, Christians are bigots, you know, like, you know, and we fall right into the trap. Oh yeah, you know, like if we don't approve of their life. You know, who cares if we approve of their life? They should be in church, right? You know, like that's you know. But if we're going to say, oh, we don't approve of your life,
I would go to that verse where God says, persuade them to come into my house.
And not okay. Depends on the translation. Compel can mean force against their will. That's not what it means.
No, absolutely. We're not going
persuade. Make your argument attractive.
Right.
So in Jesus' teaching of his disciples, at one point he sent the disciples out into the neighboring villages and towns, 2 by 2, and he said, go to the villages and bring to those villages the message that you have heard me proclaiming as you've listened to me. And if there is a village that does not receive you, don't insist. If you are not welcomed, if instead you are met with resistance, he said, shake the dust off your feet and move on. We're not trying to make converts by compulsion. But there was a component of bring the message to the people. And so there still is an idea that we need to bring the message to the people. But the times that we're living in have changed since I was a teenager.
Culture play.
People do not want strangers coming to the door of their house. They don't.
And I see that as a direct cause and effect is, because I've done cold door knocking, and with success, never with the success that you would hope to have, right? But you're just there to be a voice.
Yeah.
But the Jehovah's Witnesses not to call them out on the crowd, the devil has used it because they do not accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. They don't see Jesus as God, right? So they reject that, the Trinity. So they go door to door, and they still go door to door. And it has caused everybody
That's become a standing joke.
to see someone coming up their driveway and you say, go, leave, I don't want it.
Or we assume, it's not just door-to-door evangelists, it's door-to-door salesmen, right? When was the last time someone came to the door of your house and knocked and tried to show you a vacuum cleaner or a set of encyclopedias or a photography package? I have had all of those salesmen at my door, but not in the last 20 years.
No.
I still occasionally get a politician coming to the door asking for my vote or asking for my signature on a petition, because that's a requirement. But door-to-door approach has mostly dried up. Even for the Jehovah's Witnesses, because they've changed their strategy. What do you see? You see two people with an easel with a poster and some literature, and what are they doing? They're waiting for you to ask them a question.
We did that 50 years ago.
Yeah. So they've changed their methodology too, because they recognize the times have changed. They still do, but mostly you see them now at
That's because we live in the nearby kingdom.
Yeah. So,
We've only had Mormons, never had Jehovah's Witnesses.
okay.
The two Mormon
Okay. So, there's a balance between living my life to provoke a question and making it obvious what question should you be asking me. So, I have a couple of shirts that I wear. One of them says, come and see. It's from The Chosen. And it's got big bold letters on it, come and see. People will say, what is that about? Come and see what? Well, let me tell you, this is what Jesus said to someone who asked him, where are you staying? And he said, come and see. And it's an invitation question. Come and see. I have something I'd like to share with you, but I'm not going to force it on you. If you have an interest, I'm happy to talk with you. I am not one to be assertive, aggressive, and go up to a stranger. I don't tell people when I'm meeting somebody for the first time, I'm a pastor. There's a couple reasons why I don't. First of all, I'm afraid that if I tell someone that I'm just meeting for the first time, I'm a pastor, I don't want them to think that I expect them to treat me differently because of what I do for a living. I would rather that come up in natural conversation. And when they ask me the question and I answer them, they will not be surprised at the answer. Now, some of you may know, but probably most of you don't know, that I do some baseball umpiring. The season is over now, but during the spring and summer I umpire baseball games. And so it's an opportunity for me because everybody I deal with in a normal week is already either churched or church adjacent. They're part of the school community, they're part of the church community. They know what I do for a living, they know who I am, they know what I do for a living. And I don't get very much association outside of church circles unless I seek it out. So being a baseball umpire puts me out into another part of the community. And I don't tell people, I don't tell my partner that I'm assigned to work a baseball game until he asks me, what's your day job? A lot of the guys I work with are retired. And a lot of guys, when they do ask me finally, usually after the game is over, we're back in the parking lot getting our equipment off, talking about the game. Sometimes they'll ask me, so what do you do? And I tell them, and they said, oh, I'm sorry for my language. Because that's the most common reaction I get. Oh, I'm sorry I was using bad language. But see, I never say to somebody, I wish you wouldn't talk that way.
Right.
Because I'm in their world. I am the alien here, okay? I am the one behind enemy lines. I should not require the world, the unsaved world, to live by my saved Christian standards. I should not be surprised when they don't. I should expect it. I should not let it faze me. I also don't want it to stick to me, okay? So I don't use that language, but I also don't act very offended when somebody does, okay? I work in construction. I was in the military. I have heard every bad word in many languages. It's not new to me, and it doesn't offend me, because it's not what goes in that defiles me, it's what comes out. It's not that I heard somebody say a bad thing that defiles me, it's when I repeat it. That's what defiles me. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely.
And so, I guess that's my position on, my position as a representative of Jesus Christ in the world, that, come on in, you can come in. You're welcome to come in. We're almost done. You guys must have finished a little early tonight. Okay. We're still on chapter 2, aren't we? No, we're in chapter 3. Okay. At the end of chapter 3 is this beautiful story, famous story about Solomon's wisdom illustrated. You know the story. 2 women are living together in the same house. They both give birth to a child around the same time, within days. One morning, the 2 women wake up, and one of the children has died overnight. The other is alive. The one with the dead baby wakes up first, realizes she smothered her baby. It's why co-sleeping is terrifying to me. I don't want the baby in the bed with me. What if I roll over and smother it? I guess I'm thinking about that story, okay? Anyway, the woman with the baby who has died in the night wakes up first. She switches babies and takes the living baby and puts the dead baby by the other mother, and they have to come to the king to settle. You know this story. It's the famous illustration of Solomon's great wisdom. He hears both people. He hears both persons' cases, and he calls for his sword, and he says, I can't decide. What we're going to do is we're going to separate the baby into 2 parts, and you can each have half. And the one says, fine, at least neither one of us will have the baby. And the actual mother says, oh, no. Give the living child to her. I would rather she have it than the child die. And Solomon says, see, that's the real mother, right? That story is there. It's a true story, but it's put there in that place to illustrate the great wisdom that God had poured into this man. And it's a beautiful story, right? And it does illustrate wisdom.
Except to let it roll over on our kid, but.
Yeah, that's horrible. That's put that in the horrible stories column. There's a whole bunch of them in the Bible already, right? Horrible stories, like the live bed warmer thing. That's Chapter 4 talks about Solomon's administration, and this is another illustration of his wisdom, because he sets up his kingdom. He divides his kingdom into 12 districts, and he puts a governor over each district, and then he says to each governor, you and your district are responsible to provide for the king's household needs for 1 month out of the year. That's tax, right? Your district is going to provide for January, your districts, you've got February, et cetera, and that's how the king's administration was supported. That was how the government was run. And at the end of the chapter, there's a list of all of the provisions that it took to support Solomon's household for a day. It's a massive list. Yeah, this government has inflated dramatically. it does have a tendency to do that, right? At the end of chapter 4, there is a description, another description of Solomon's wisdom and knowledge and the various subjects that he demonstrated wisdom in, including botany and biology, arts and literature, and all different subjects were of interest to him. Music, the arts, animals, trees, all of these different kinds of things that he knew about. He really was an educated man. Okay, maybe we can get through chapter 5. Chapter 5 talks about the provisions and the beginning of the work on the temple. We talked about this with David. David had a great relationship with Hiram, the king of Tyre, that is modern-day Lebanon to the north. And Lebanon was known, and is known still today, for its cedar forests, cedar trees. So Hiram, when he learned that David had died and Solomon was now king, sent an envoy to Solomon to establish diplomatic relations, reminded Solomon that his father David had been negotiating with Hiram for materials to build the temple. Solomon responded, yes, that's true. David wanted to build a temple. God said no, he was a man of war. Now I am no longer, I am now king, and our nation is at peace. There are no wars for me to fight. And so I am appointed to build a temple. And so let's talk materials. And Hiram and Solomon negotiated for the cedars and the cypress trees. And Hiram would supply the materials and craftsmen, and he would cut down the trees, put them together in rafts or barges, float them down the Mediterranean Sea to whatever coastal city, port Solomon decided, and then separate the rafts into logs and transport them to Jerusalem for the temple. And Solomon, meanwhile, was going to send Hiram an annual tribute of food, grain and oil, olive oil, and other things to provide for Hiram's household to survive. And so they had an international trade agreement. And then we read that Solomon conscripted 30,000 laborers, an army of construction workers. We were talking about this at dinner too. One translation says they were slaves, but they weren't. They were not necessarily volunteers, but they were pressed into service, but they were treated well. 30,000 laborers divided into 3 groups of 10,000 each, and they would work 1 month on and 2 months off. Pretty forward thinking. In addition to the 30,000 skilled workers, Solomon also raised a force of 80,000 unskilled laborers, people to carry materials, move materials. 80,000 carriers. Every once in a while, people speculate, how in the world did the ancient peoples build things like the Great Pyramids with primitive tools? And the answer is an unlimited workforce and simple machines like ramps and levers, things like that. 30,000 skilled laborers, 80,000 carriers, and then another, what's the number of the stone cutters? 70,000 carriers and 80,000 men to work in the quarries cutting stone. And then he also appointed 3,300 foremen to supervise them. And I'm thinking, I put this in my notes, I'm thinking of President Franklin Roosevelt and the Civilian Conservation Corps that helped bring our country out of the Great Depression, put a bunch of unemployed people to work. building some of the infrastructure of our nation, highways and dams and other things, some of which still exist today. And quite impressive. I've seen some of the work that they've done in some of the national parks, and the work that they did in the late 30s and even during World War II still exists to this day, and that helped our nation recover from that economic depression. I wondered if they were thinking about Solomon's workforce when they did it. Okay. Chapter 6 and chapter 7, they're both kind of simple to summarize. Chapter 6 talks about the work being done to build the temple, its dimensions, and I think the most impressive thing to me is in verse 7 of chapter 6. When the house was built, it was with stone prepared at the quarry, so that neither hammer, nor axe, nor any tool of iron was heard in the house while it was being built. All of the stones were cut and shaped and measured off-site and then carried and put in place at the temple with no banging and loud noises and tools. Why? Here's another thing that I think our current culture is losing. There is a sense of reverence about the building of the temple where God's presence would be the visible representation of the house of God. There was a reverence about it. This is a sacred place, and we ought to treat it differently than we treat every other place.
Here in Ocean Grove,
Yes,
New Jersey,
yes.
the auditorium,
Mm-hmm.
they said when they built that, the workers had to actually sign that they would not swear when the building.
Yeah, well, that's,
They didn't want that to defile the building when they built it. They actually had to sign and
Yeah.
swear they would not curse or use
Yes.
appropriate language while they were there working on that building.
because they recognized that what they were doing was not just any building project. This is a holy place. Now, I'm saying as a commentary, not as a judgment, just as a commentary, that in my lifetime, our culture, even in our church culture, has grown increasingly casual.
Yes.
How we dress, how we conduct ourselves, in the space that we call the worship space. We used to use the word sanctuary, and many of us grew up in churches where that room was never used for any other purpose except Sunday morning worship, or maybe vacation Bible school worship, not a multi-purpose room like we're using today. Now, this is not me issuing a judgment that things are not the way they should be. It's just an observation. This is the direction in which our society is moving. How we dress. And not just in church either, how we dress at the office. It used to be men wore suits and shirts and ties. If they had an office job, they wore a suit, not even a sport coat and slacks, but a suit with a shirt and a tie. My father he was a World War II veteran. In those days, even in battle, the uniform that our soldiers wore into battle included what the Army called a field scarf, what everybody else knows as a necktie. And that was the combat dress uniform. It included a shirt with a necktie. And right up until the day my father no longer worked outside, he used to come home, he was a salesman, he would come home having worn a shirt and tie all day at work. He would come home, it would be time to go out into the field and cut firewood, and he would take off his suit coat and put on like a flannel, we used to call them CPO jackets, maybe some of you guys will remember them, like a heavy work shirt. He would put that on, he would leave his necktie on. That was just, he was so used to wearing a necktie, he wore his necktie while he was cutting firewood. He buttoned his jacket so the tie wouldn't dangle down in front of the chainsaw. And that was how formally he grew up. Even his dress was formal. Now we're much more casual. I almost never wear a necktie anymore. I wear a suit and tie if it's a funeral or a wedding. Otherwise, I don't put on a tie. And we're just more informal, we're more casual. I'm not saying that's bad, I'm not saying it's wrong, it's just the direction in which we've moved. But that has brought with it, I think, a little bit less reverence for those things that we recognize as sacred. These are the things of God, and we ought to be mindful that we are in a sacred place. Now, where is sacred? For Christians today, where is the sanctuary? Where does God live? Everywhere I am is sacred because God is with me, yes? So should I always be taking off my shoes because where I am standing is holy ground? No. But there ought to be an inner awareness that if I am always in God's presence because He dwells in me, then everywhere I am, I ought to be thinking, this is the place where God is, and how should I behave if I'm in the presence of God? Most of us don't probably think about that as often as we should. And now we're out of time. All right. Again, I did most of the talking here tonight. I'm going to talk as long as you let me. You did. You got involved. Thank you for that. Yeah. If you have not joined our Facebook Bible reading Facebook group, I invite you to do that. Harmony Ministries Facebook page and find the group, or if you want me to send you an invitation to join the group, I will. I put a digital copy of this up on that group, and as soon as the video is processed, I put a link to the YouTube video up too, so that if you miss a week, you can always go back. If you really find that you just can't stand the thought of not hearing me talk for an hour and a half. Yeah, right. I know that's a lot. Thank you. Something you'd like for us to pray for tonight? Is it okay if we pray for your dad? Do we call him Tony or do we call him Tony? We call him Tony. Anthony's father, Tony, is checked into a place where he is getting proper care, he's safe, and getting the care he needs, and we're thankful for that. And he continues to accept that as his current reality. Anybody else? Kathy?
My niece, she was in that restore recovery place over by Crystal Run.
Oh, yeah.
And she was really almost through it, and I guess she went to the hospital, she had some pain, and she left the hospital, we don't know where she is, so we're praying we can find her.
Can we know her first name to pray for her?
Mackenzie.
Mackenzie?
And she does have a daughter. The daughter lives with the dad, and I'm just praying that we can find her. And I'm praying for a miracle, honestly, that she can come through this.
We'll pray along with you. Anyone else?
Peace in Jerusalem.
Peace in Jerusalem.
For my younger brother, I'd like to come to this conference.
Where is he now? He's in Mexico, and he's trying to immigrate to Mexico. What is his first name? Fernando. Thank you. Anyone else? Shall we pray? Thank you, Heavenly Father, for the time that we spent here tonight talking, me doing a lot of talking, and am hopeful as we go along that people will feel more comfortable in being included in asking questions and offering opinions. I'm grateful for those who did tonight and for the different points of view and perspectives shared tonight that help us to widen our thinking, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you for what we can learn as we read in the Old Testament and the accounts of David and Solomon and the others that we'll come to. Some of it seems like it doesn't really make a lot of sense to us. It's foreign, it's old-fashioned, and it's out of date. And yet, it is the Word of God that you have given to us, that we might read it and know you better and understand the unfolding plan that you have for the ages and for us in particular. And I pray that we will come to enjoy and appreciate every chance we have to read and to talk about it. I do pray, Father, for Tony. I'm thankful that he has agreed to go into this rehab place. Thankful for it, for his placement there, and for his acceptance of it, at least so far. And I pray that he will adjust and he will be content there, and that he will thrive, and his health needs will be looked after well. And that he can enjoy a long and meaningful life while he's there. And I'm thankful for the peace of mind that that gives to Anthony and to other members of his family, that he is in a place where others are paying attention and making sure that he gets what he needs. I pray for Kathy's niece, Mackenzie. I pray for her to turn up, to re-enter the lives of the people that love and care for her, and that she would return, if she needs to return to the recovery center, so that she can continue her efforts to be clean and sober. I pray, Father, that she is able to be a vital and healthy part of her daughter's life. And I pray for her family as they wait and wonder and hope and pray for her to be to return and to be found safe. I pray for the peace of Jerusalem, Lord, for the end of violence. I pray, Lord, for calmer heads to prevail, for people to recognize the value of human life, even when we don't agree, even when we don't see things the way others do, even when we have fundamental differences in our worldview, our religion, and other ways and things about which we differ, that we can agree that every human life has great value. We know where the value of a human life comes from. Not everybody will acknowledge that you are the one who gives that life value, but for whatever reason, I pray, Father, that people will stop seeking to hurt other people in the name of ideology or religion or any other thing. And I pray for Fernando, who is working to make his way from Mexico to the United States. I pray for his safety. I pray for there to be a means for him to safely and legally enter the United States and to be reunited with his family already here. I pray your blessing on him and many others in his situation. Lord, your word tells us to be compassionate, to be considerate, to be generous, to leave something for those who are displaced peoples, who are the strangers and the aliens among us. And I pray that we would open our hearts to recognize that there is room. And we pray for Fernando and his family in this time as he seeks to find that place. I ask your blessing on each one of us as we go to our homes tonight and throughout the rest of this week and until we gather again for worship on Sunday. May you be glorified in our lives, I pray.